Welcome to Choose Courage Inc., where we skip the boring intros and jump straight into reimagining business and workplace experiences with We Ain't Afraid to Go There conversations. Now, this is a special bonus episode that we created just for you, and it's a live recording on one of my favorite topics, the discipline of hope. You know, we're often asked about our work ethic, but how's your hope ethic? What's possible when we see hope as something we need to practice every single day? In this live recorded talk that's followed by a Q&A and discussion, I share how we can approach hope as a discipline during times of grief and uncertainty. I'm later joined by partner and facilitator at HmntyCntrd Alba Villamil. And together, we think through the intentional decisions we can make and how we relate to the world around us. And most importantly, how we can choose courage over comfort when it feels like all is lost. In this bonus episode, we'll touch on topics like how can we differentiate hope from toxic positivity or false optimism? What's the difference between helplessness and powerlessness? And why does knowing the difference matter? How can we navigate profound grief and anger? And what we can do to protect our peace and our boundaries. Now, I go through a lot of content in this talk, and so if you go to thedisciplineofhope.com, you'll be able to download a PDF version of the slides, as well as the rituals and the activities that I share. So if you're looking for relief, if you feel like your nervous system is going through it, or if you're just looking for a way forward in a difficult season, then this conversation is for you. So if you're listening to this, my assumption is that you're coming into this space with some curiosity around how we can think of, engage in, and relate to hope in the midst of what can feel like chronic despair and exposure to trauma. And so today there are a lot of different directions that I can take this conversation, but the reality is that regardless of what is happening around us today, I actually really need this talk to be relevant and useful to you 6 months from now, a year from now, 4, 10 years from now, and so on. And so I'm going to be talking about the discipline of hope with that context in mind. And while you may think and believe that I'm giving this talk to you, I need you to understand that I'm actually giving this talk to and for me today as well. That I need this reminder today, that I need it as I prepare for the year ahead. I need it as I prepare to enter into difficult conversations, both within and outside the workplace. I need it as I process this conversation I had recently about my nephew. He goes to a bilingual school. About 95% of the kids, the preschoolers, are Mexican. And so I need it today as I'm processing this conversation around what's the game plan if his school gets raided for some reason? What if his mom can't get to him quick enough and I need to go, right? So I'm speaking this talk to myself in the midst of all that context. And I need to give this talk to myself because I think if you're in the world long enough, if you find yourself in the midst of hyper capitalistic cultures long enough, and you are actually serious about values like integrity and justice, that it's only normal for you to have these moments where you kind of question everything, right? And you're wondering if we're only alive just to suffer. And I think if you're doing this work right, and I'm talking about the work about caring deeply for others and the communities that we're in, I think if you're doing this work well, that it is only natural for you to have these moments where you might want to just give up. And that's why we need to talk about hope. That's why we need to talk about the discipline of hope, not as a way to shame ourselves or guilt ourselves into starving on crumbs of toxic positivity, but really as a way to not lose yourself or betray yourself in who you are and what you value as a person. And so thank you for creating space, for extending the mental and emotional energy to have this overdue conversation. And I hope that this will carry you. My hope is that you leave this conversation today a little more hopeful, a little more curious, a little more drawn to the idea and possibility of what it's like to not live in and stay in the what if. Some additional context into me and who I am. My name is Vivianne Castillo. I'm the founder of HmntyCntrd. I'm a counseling and human service professional who made a career switch into the tech and design industry. I'm a passionate self-care advocate. I'm a resident of the land where the pizza runs deep, aka I'm a diehard Chicagoan. I'm a creative at heart whose current medium is consulting and entrepreneurship. And I'm committed to choosing courage over comfort in every facet of my life. I'm a Black woman. I come from a multicultural upbringing. My mom's half Korean immigrant, came over to the States when she was young. I'm also half Nigerian. I was born and raised in America. What else is helpful? For those of you who care, I'm an INFJ. If you are into the Enneagram, I'm a 3-wing 2. For my astrology folks out here, I'm a Cancer with a Libra for moon and rising. I have a master's in counseling, and I also have a master's in theological studies. Not a lot of people know that, but it's because when you are working with people who are suffering, they're often wondering, where's God in the midst of all this? So I'm going to be approaching this topic in a way that HmntyCntrd often runs our workshops and trainings, which is that I'll be approaching this from more of an emotional and therapeutic lens, so that the mindset shifts discussed today can be carried into points and areas of your life. And so today, I'm really only operating with this one goal, and that is I want us to shift our understanding of what hope is from this common association as a noun to a deeper understanding of hope as a verb, so that individually and collectively, we can cultivate meaningful change in a sustainable way. It's important to acknowledge that there's a lot of depth of what it means to be hopeful. And I think a lot of times when we see hope as a noun instead of a verb, we find ourselves getting disappointed because we place hope in the wrong things or the wrong people. And so we're going to explore, what does it look like to see hope as a verb, as a discipline? And so to ground us, I'm a big quote person, if you don't know that about me, and I want to ground us in these 2 quotes for today. The first one being this: absorb what is useful, discard what is useless, and add what is specifically your own. I love this quote because, let's be real, for many of us, myself included, sometimes we are really quick to dismiss things that don't immediately fit into our worldview. And if something doesn't feel like a perfect match for a situation, we can write it off. And many of us have been trained, sometimes by life, by past experience, and even how people engage with ideas on LinkedIn, to scan quickly for what's wrong, for what doesn't apply, or for why something won't work. And it's a protective instinct, right? And for many, it's also a trauma response. But here's where that instinct backfires. When we shut things down too quickly, we miss the chance to stretch, to reimagine, to take what's useful and make it our own. Because growth isn't about finding the perfect answer. It's about piecing together what serves us and letting go of the rest. So as we dive into this conversation today, I want to invite you to notice, where does resistance come up for you? Get curious about, where did that come from? Is that something that I've learned, that was taught, that I've experienced recently? And instead of dismissing something outright, or if you kind of notice that tension or resistance, my encouragement is for you to ask yourself, what can I absorb that's useful? What should I discard because it's useless to me? And how can I make this uniquely my own? And the last quote that I'm going to ground us in for today is, hope has 2 beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they do not remain as they are. I love this quote so much. And I think sometimes we can sit in our anger, in part because it gives us a sense of control, right? When it feels like everything else is burning around us, anger can give us this sense of control and power back. And it makes me think about this other quote. I told you I'm a huge quote person. It makes me think about this other quote when it comes to anger, and it goes like this. It says, I sat with my anger long enough until she told me her real name was grief. And sometimes what we think is anger and what is really festering is actually a lot of unresolved grief. And so for me, it kind of gets me curious around, how do I begin to shift out of anger? Especially when we think about the context of today in the world that we're in, because more times than not, I find that anger often surfaces at this intersection of helplessness and powerlessness. So let's get into it. What is the difference between helplessness and powerlessness? I think this is really important before we go deeper into this idea of hope. When I'm thinking about helplessness and powerlessness, we all love a good two by two, right? I'm often thinking about where is this originating from, but also where is the source of control? So when it comes to helplessness, when we're thinking about the origin of feeling and source of control, more times than not, it's often coming from this internal space, internal beliefs or internal things that are happening. Whereas powerlessness is often focused on the external. So I'll give you an example of this. When you think about helplessness, the origin of feeling, this feeling often originates from our internal beliefs and perceptions about our abilities and effectiveness in handling situations. So it's often shaped by self-doubt, past experiences, or narratives that we've absorbed about our limitations. Even if we technically have the ability to change something, we might not believe we do, so we don't act. So an example of this, a person avoids learning to swim because they believe they're not athletic enough and would fail no matter how much they tried. So this feeling, right? This feeling comes from their own internal belief about their lack of ability, even though they have the capacity to learn if they sought guidance and practice. When I think about powerlessness, though, this is often focused on external factors. This feeling typically stems from external factors beyond our immediate control. Things like systemic barriers, societal norms, or decisions made by others that limit our options. It's not about what we believe about ourselves, but it's about real world constraints that dictate what is or isn't possible in a given moment. So while powerlessness can feel just as frustrating as helplessness, the key difference is that no amount of personal effort or mindset shifts alone will remove these external obstacles. So example of this would be a homeowner feels powerless as a major storm damages their property, leaving them to wait for insurance to provide support. So the situation is caused by an external force, the storm, and the homeowner has no immediate control over the damage or the speed of recovery. Now, shifting a little bit into the source of control, when we're thinking about helplessness, oftentimes this comes from when we feel inadequate to change our situation, often regardless of our capabilities. So imagine you want to get in shape, right? And you keep telling yourself, I've never been athletic and I'm just not the kind of person who works out. No one is physically stopping you from exercising. And you could take small steps towards movement, but your belief that you're incapable keeps you from even trying. So helplessness is an external block. It's when we believe we can't do something, even when we technically can. This comes from past experiences. So fear of failure or a deeply ingrained narrative that we're not the kind of person who can succeed in a certain area. But in reality, the ability to change is just there. We just don't trust it. We have all had these moments, right? Like we just don't trust our ability to actually get something that is within reach. Whereas with powerlessness, it's often focusing on external. So when we feel we have no absolute authority or means to affect change because the constraints are placed by external circumstances or entities. So you're stuck in traffic on a highway due to a major accident ahead. And no matter how much you want to move, there's nothing you can do. You can't change the fact that the road is blocked, and your only option is to wait or to find an alternative route if one even exists. So powerlessness happens when external forces are in control. And no amount of effort, willpower, or positive thinking will change the situation. You know, your flight gets canceled. There's nothing you can do about that. So again, the key here is recognizing when something is truly, truly out of our hands and figuring out where we do have choices while staying patient, adjusting expectations, or planning differently for next time. Now, the reason why I want to distinguish the two is because with helplessness, you can actually do something in the midst of that, right? Powerlessness, there's certain things that I just can't move. You know, there's budget cuts at my company. I can't, hit up the CEO and be like, this is bogus, reverse that. There's a storm happening, what have you, right? But helplessness, there's still room and space for us to do something and address that. But in order to do so, we have to better understand as well, what can helplessness look like? And so when I think about helplessness, I often think about the common causes and the common triggers. The way that I'm going to distinguish the two is common causes tend to be often long-term and systemic in nature, whereas when I'm thinking about common triggers, these often tend to be short-term and like situational. So I'll give you an example of what that might look like. For common causes, that could look like past trauma or repeated failure. So experiences of failure, rejection, or harm can create a learned belief that effort is futile. Work in corporate America long enough, you've probably experienced this. Perfectionism and fear of failure, lack of control in early life. So if you grew up in an environment with limited choices, whether that's due to how your parents parented, poverty, instability, that can ingrain some of these beliefs that personal agency is an illusion, right? Chronic stress and burnout, there's a couple other things that you see here. So again, long-term, and they tend to be systemic in nature. Whereas for common triggers, these tend to be more short-term and situational. So things like being rejected and ignored, receiving negative feedback, repeated failure in a short period, seeing someone else succeed effortlessly, feeling overwhelmed by too many responsibilities, take your pick. And so again, that context is helpful because what it does is it gives us an understanding of how do I not only start to recognize this within myself, but if I'm able to recognize what I am experiencing right now as helplessness, then I'm going to be able to more quickly find a way to pivot myself out of it. I have more control and more power when I'm in helplessness or when I'm in a state of helplessness. And this brings us back to the idea of hope. And I really love this definition of hope. Hope doesn't preclude feeling sadness or frustration or anger or any other emotion that makes total sense. Hope isn't an emotion. Hope is not optimism. Hope is a discipline, and we have to practice it every single day. So Kaba's quote is really a reminder that the answer to feeling hopeless isn't toxic positivity or forced optimism. The answer to make our engagement with hope a discipline because of what's at stake if we don't. It's so important to understand what is truly at stake if we don't make hope a discipline. And that is that we will begin to believe that a better future is not possible, that we will begin to build our home in despair. And so here's what I'm going to do for the remainder of this talk, and then we're going to switch into live Q&A and discussion. I'm going to get super practical. I'm going to share with you a few rituals and practices that I engage in as I commit to a discipline of hope. And so it's going to look something like this. I will essentially share an idea like this, common causes and common triggers of helplessness, and share some thoughts or observations. And then I'm going to propose a practice or a ritual that I engage in as an example of what a discipline of hope could look like. So let's take this slide, for example. When we look at these causes and triggers, I think one thing becomes really clear, that most of the time, our helplessness isn't just about us. Many of us are collateral damage of other people's circumstances. We've been shaped by parents who were too overwhelmed to nurture our confidence, by teachers or bosses who couldn't see our potential or value, by systems that made us question our worth. We've learned to shrink, to wait for permission, to believe that we have to prove ourselves, that we are worthy of being enough. But here's the truth, and that's that helplessness is a learned response, not a permanent state. And that should make us excited. Helplessness is a learned response, not a permanent state. And if it can be learned, it can be unlearned, which is why we can't just talk about overcoming helplessness. We have to practice it, not by waiting for someone else to validate us, but by reclaiming something that helplessness has stolen from so many of us, the ability to celebrate ourselves without conditions and without permission. And so one of the ways that I do that is through a ritual of celebration so that I can remember and that so I can practice how to celebrate myself without the conditions of needing to appease somebody else first. And so here's what it looks like. This is more of a journaling reflection kind of activity. And again, I will give you all these slides. I will give you all these activities. But usually what I end up doing this ritual is I just start to think about what are just some things that I've done that only I would know about that would be considered a small or big win in my personal life. So these aren't the things you post on LinkedIn, right? These are things that What are some things that only I know about that would be considered a small or big win? For some of us, it's I showered today. I was able to overcome this bout of depression and shower. For some of us, it's I was able to eat something for breakfast besides coffee, right? But I write a list and I put an S next to what I see as a small win and B next to what I see as a big win. And then I do the same above with my professional life. And with each bucket, personal and professional, it's a moment to reflect on which one do I feel like had the more wins? What's something that surprised me or that I realized after doing this activity? Because we are and should be in this constant state of getting to know ourselves. I think that's a huge part of growth. And I think that's why there's some people who, instead of growing, they're just growing old. They're not being intentional with nurturing their relationship with themselves and understanding themselves. And so this ritual of celebration is one of the ways that I do that. So again, you kind of see the picture there, right? I'm going to kind of share an idea and I'm just going to immediately tie it to a ritual or a practice that you can do. So when it comes to hope, our relationship with hope, I'm actually going to break this down into 3 different buckets. And I want to kind of shift our mindset into how we see hope. So I want us to see our relationship with hope is a rebellion. Our relationship with hope is a choice. And our relationship with hope is a commitment. So let's start with the first one. Our relationship with hope is a rebellion against despair, choosing to see possibility where others see none. When I talk about hope, I have found comfort in recognizing and identifying it as a rebellion against despair. Hope isn't passive. It's not some vague, ethereal concept. It's intentional, it's deliberate, and perhaps most importantly, it's defiant. It refuses to accept that what is right now is all there will ever be. Hope is a refusal to surrender. It's a refusal. But here's the thing. If hope is to be real, if hope is to be sturdy and enduring, it also has to make room for grief. It's so easy to talk about hope without talking about grief, but you have to talk about grief. It has to reckon with the pain and the losses and the brokenness of what often life can surface, because grief isn't just something that happens to us, it's something that we need to move through. I like to see grief as a hallway. You know, it's a transition, it's not the living place, and it was never meant to become a home. We can't live where we never intended to take up residence. And yet sometimes it feels like we're stuck in that hallway, right? Maybe we hang pictures on the walls of that hallway. We bring in furniture, we unpack as though we're going to stay there forever. But grief, for all its weight and power, has never intended to be the place we reside. And this is where the discipline of hope comes in, because hope reminds us that there is another door at the end of that hallway. That door doesn't erase the loss we've carried through the passage, but it invites us to step forward, to imagine life beyond the walls of what we've endured. Hope doesn't mean denying grief. It means acknowledging it, honoring it, but refusing to let it define us. It means saying, I see the loss, I feel the loss, and I will still choose to look for what might come next. I remember having this session with my therapist. Listen, my therapist is great. Like if I could tip a therapist, I would. And I remember having this session with her and she was like, you know, Vivianne, you need to learn how to really just sit with the hard, the difficult, the bad. You just need to allow yourself to acknowledge it and to feel it and be present with it. And I was like, cool, cool, cool. How long is that going to take? Because I have shit to do, right? Like, no one wants to like be buddy with all of that, right? But what she's acknowledging though is that it's a choice. It's not an easy choice, but it is a choice. And it's not always immediate, but it is possible. Again, it's not always immediate, but it is possible. And every time we choose to take even the smallest step forward in that hallway of grief, we rebel against despair. Woof. I need to hear that from myself today. Every time we choose to take even the smallest step forward in that hallway of grief, we rebel against despair. And that's why I often engage in what I call a burning bowl ritual. This is something that I often do on around my birthday and then also on like New Year's Eve. And what you end up doing for this is you get a stack of sticky notes or index cards and you spend about 90 seconds answering a series of prompts and you write down one idea per piece of paper. So here's some examples of some of those prompts. What are the lies about myself that I need to let go? And you just write one lie, one answer per sticky note per piece of paper. Once you've done that, you put that aside. You go on to the next prompt. What beliefs about work and career do I need to let go? One answer per piece of paper. What fears and anxieties do I need to let go? What are the unrealistic or unhelpful expectations that I place on myself that I need to let go? What generational or family chains or toxicity do I need to let go? What barriers to my joy and peace do I need to let go? What heartbreak or broken relationships do I need to let go? And what's causing me to experience guilt or shame that I need to let go? And so you do this through each pile. Again, one answer per sticky note. Take your time with it. And then what you end up doing is you create a fire. I actually have like one of those like small traveling grills. You create a fire and you just go stack by stack, paper by paper, and just throw one piece of paper one at a time into the fire. And as you're doing that, as you're kind of casting those things that you are symbolically committing to let go into the fire, you can pray, you can meditate, you can cry, do what you need to do in the silence during and afterwards. But it's about an acknowledgement that I am going to make a choice towards attempting to or trying to let this go. Now, what I recommend is at the end, you smell like smoke. And so I like to just take a shower because then I'm clean, right? It's like I'm moving past this like moment. Now, keep in mind, I do this activity for sure twice a year, but also there's just some times where I just need to let some shit go. So I will do the burning bowl ritual. And what I want to say is give yourself grace. You will find that even if you are doing this 2, 3, however many times, you will find that there are certain names that still make the list of what heartbreak or broken relationships that you need to let go. You will find that there's certain things that you keep putting on these pieces of paper, and that's okay. It's about how do I acknowledge that? How do I make a choice to at least seeing that this is something that is impacting my spirit and my grief? And how do I at least make one step towards trying to create a greater distance between that and what is causing me such pain? So you could do this with friends. You can make your own questions. It really has a lot of flexibility, and it is one of the biggest things I love to do for my spirit. And so understanding hope as a rebellion is about keeping our hearts soft and our boundaries firm so that we can dream of what's possible and protect that dream from despair. How are you keeping your heart soft and your boundaries firm today? For some of you, get off LinkedIn. Get off social media. Do not talk to your mom, whatever it is, right? How are you going to keep your heart soft and your boundaries firm today? This balance between softness and strength allows us to embrace hope, not as a fleeting feeling, but as an active, courageous stance in the face of uncertainty. Which brings us to our next mindset. And that's how our relationship with hope is a choice that requires us to choose courage over comfort. Because here's the thing about comfort, it's deceptive. It often masquerades as safety, as stability, as good enough to be acceptable. We can become so settled in our current reality, our routines, our limitations, even our struggles, that we stop reaching for something greater. And the hardest part, well, that's when our reality is painful, yet we still cling to it because it's familiar. It's what has caused, it's what's caused us at some point in our life to hold on to a relationship longer than we should have. So it's caused us to hold on to a job or a belief much longer than we should have because of familiarity. Because feeling safer than the unknown, even when it holds us back. And so then we stop dreaming, we stop imagining, we stop pushing ourselves to grow because somewhere along the line, somewhere along the way, we forget what's possible. And we forget what's possible within us, what we're capable of. And if you live long enough and life has a way of dulling our sense of possibility, doesn't it? A few too many setbacks, a few too many no's, and suddenly we start shrinking ourselves to fit inside a story that was never meant to hold us. And so we forget that we're capable of learning. We forget that we're capable of growing, of thriving, especially when we're capable of it in the face of adversity. But here's the beautiful part is that hope has a way of reminding us. When we choose courage over comfort, we disrupt that story of limitation. We wake up to the truth that we are not stuck, that we are not powerless, that we are not defined by what happened yesterday. And this is why it is so, so, so important to be reminded of who we are and why I'd like to share just 2 activities for you to explore outside of our time together today. And so the first activity is called Remembering Who You Are, and it's a simple one. For this activity, you're going to focus on who you are so you can get more clear on what it means and looks like for you to operate from a place that can empower you to choose courage over comfort. And so what you do is you think about 5 people in your life, and when you reach out to those 5 people, you ask them, what shows up when I do? What qualities do I bring into a room? Think about people who know you. Like, they know you. Think about people who care about you. These are the people you want to be asking this question to. And, if they ask for clarification, just let them know, hey, just trust your gut with how you're reading this question. What shows up when I do? What qualities do I bring into a room? Ask both questions at the same time. And just spend time reflecting on the good and encouraging words from those in your life who care about you. Write them on pieces of paper and put them in envelopes and reserve them for a day when you need to be reminded. I had some friends at a birthday party of mine a couple years ago. They each wrote me a letter, and they were like, we won't always be there physically when you need us, but when you need to be reminded of who you are and how much we care about you, just pull one of our letters. And so now I have these letters that I can pull when I'm in my head and I need to pull myself out of it. And this activity is something similar. It allows you to create an opportunity for yourself to be able to pull into words from people who know you and care about you when you need to be pulled out of your head. And so again, think about 5 people who know you, who care about you, and who have your back. And the second activity that I'll introduce under this mindset shift is called creating your oriki. Now, what this is a Yoruba greeting, and it's comprised of 2 words, the word meaning head and the word meaning to greet and praise. And it's really this braggadocious praise to acknowledge who you are, and it's about speaking life and possibility into your legacy and into your future. And so here's how you structure it. You have your first and middle name, house of your last name. If you are the first one, then you would say first of her name. If you are a junior, you would say second of their name. And then you have the structure of kind of like a description, a descriptor, an occupation of, and then a noun. And so what you're going to be doing in this activity is you're going to be throwing away all humility and giving yourself all the credit. It's about thinking about how can I be so clear and braggadocious in who I am and what I'm about. And you can get creative with it. You can use royal names like queen or duke or duchess of. You can get creative with your descriptors or play with alliteration. And so I'll share with you one of mine so you can get an idea of what that might look like. So we have Vivianne Chue of House Castillo, first of her name, builder and reverer of dreams, taker of stages, dame of boldness, holder of hope, conqueror of corporate chaos, protector of her joy, seeker of inner peace, breaker of generational chains. Sometimes you have to be reminded of who you are. And so with this activity, you can create this for yourself. I've had people who they write it up for themselves and it's framed on their desk. I've had people who've sent me theirs. Like, it's whatever you got to do to remember that more times than not, pretty much every single time, the places that we work in will never truly see you for who you are. And so we have to remind ourselves, we have to learn how to nurture ourselves in those moments of doubt and insecurity. And so this is just a really fun and powerful way to do that for yourself. Because again, sometimes we just need to be reminded of who we are so that we can get more clear on values and beliefs that allow us to show up that way in people's lives and to show up in that way in our lives as well. Sometimes we need to be reminded of who we are, not because we've lost ourselves, but because we've settled for a version of ourselves that's smaller, that's safer, or that's more acceptable to the world around us. It's easy, right, to let the noise of life kind of drown out our values and beliefs, to let the pressures of fitting in or surviving pull us away from who we truly are. But when we pause, when we reconnect with the core of who we are, our strengths, our creativity, our convictions, we remember what's truly possible. And that is, hope is a deliberate choice that calls us to embrace courage over comfort, urging us to act on our beliefs even when it's challenging. We must remember that life isn't something that just happens to us. It's something that we can also create moment by moment, choice by choice. Because when we remember who we are, we stop being bystanders. We stop letting life happen to us and we start shaping it, owning it, and creating it for ourselves. Hope isn't about waiting for things to get better. That's not hope. It's about believing in what's possible and then choosing to act on that belief. That's where real transformation begins. That's where real transformation can come from. And so my question for you and my encouragement for you is to chew on, what are the ways that I can choose courage over comfort today that acknowledge who I am and what I'm about? What's one small thing I can do? Again, it doesn't have to be leaps and bounds in terms of choices and these steps that you take, but it can even be one small thing. For some of us, it's as simple as just letting a friend know, hey, this is something that I'm excited about or something that I want to move towards, right? For some of you, it's that email that you know you should have sent weeks ago. Or it's that inquiry that you wanted to send, months ago, but you've just been waiting for the right time. Today's the right time. If you're looking for a sign, this is it. Today's the right time. And so I'm going to close us on this final one. Last but not least, hope is a commitment that drives each of us to commit to meaningful change within ourselves and our communities. So hope isn't just a fleeting feeling or a passive state of mind. It's a commitment. It's a deliberate decision to believe that change is possible, even when the path forward isn't clear. And again, a lot of times we try to wait for the right time of the path becoming more clear. But that's not how hope operates. It's deliberate, and it's deliberate in terms of what you're able to recognize as possible to change and then taking a step towards that direction. But hope is not free. Hope is not free. There's a cost to hope. And I know that's not like the most encouraging campaign to start off with, but there's a cost to hope. You see, hope asks something of us. It asks us to invest in transformation within ourselves, within our relationships, and within the systems we navigate. This means confronting discomfort. This means reimagining our relationship with uncertainty and moving toward the places where change is most desperately needed, even when we're unsure of what success might look like. But at the end of the day, we have to choose intentionally, proactively and deliberately choose the things aligned with change. So an intentional relationship with hope means choosing to foster change where it's most needed, even when the outcome is uncertain. I would say it's safe to say that each of us have had a moment or might be in a moment where we know that a change needs to happen. Whether that is a habit, whether that is a discipline, whether that's in a certain relationship, we know that there is change that is needed and that we need to move towards in our life, but we're hesitant because we don't know if the outcome will be certain. But an intentional relationship means resisting the temptation to give up when the odds feel stacked against us. An intentional relationship means resisting the temptation to give up when the odds feel like they won't be in our favor. It means stepping into the spaces where the outcomes are unknown and choosing again and again and again to work towards something better. That's tough. And that's why hope can have a cost. It's tough to keep choosing over and over and over something when you don't know how it's going to work out or when it feels like it's not moving in the direction you want it to go. But again, hope isn't passive. It's active. It's commitment to not just dream of a better future, but to build it with our own hands. It's this commitment that drives meaningful change, change in our own hearts and change in the collective spaces that we share. Yeah, thank you. So what we're gonna do is, I know y'all have a bunch of questions that have been coming through. Alba and I, and actually, Alba, I'm gonna have you pin yourself as well as just share who you are and introduce yourself. Alba is partner, facilitator at HmntyCntrd. And yeah, I think it might be helpful for people just to hear a little bit about your background so they can have some context into how we're chopping up these questions.
Yeah. So, hey, everyone. My name is Alba Villamil. I'm a partner and facilitator here at HmntyCntrd. My background is more in the social sciences. So, I come from a sociology background, specifically focusing on issues around racism, immigration, and inequality. And so I really try to kind of bring an equity-centered lens to the work that we do at HmntyCntrd. I like to think of like Vivianne as kind of the heart, the person who's like really focusing on the trauma and the interpersonal. And I'm really trying to think through more on like the structural end of things of how can we make either our products, our services, or our workplaces more safe and equitable for the people involved. So for today's session, I'm going to be kind of facilitating the Q&A here, going through some of the questions that you all have been dropping in, and then adding a few thoughts here and there, because Vivianne and I are very different people. So we tend to approach these key issues in very different ways, which I think is why we complement each other so well. So I want to start off with kind of like a big question, but it's actually something that has been echoed in quite a few of the questions that have been submitted. And that's that people really resonated with the quote that you shared around how important it is to kind of keep your heart soft and your boundaries firm. And a lot of people were actually asking, like, how do you think about the concept of keeping your heart soft? Like, what does that entail for you?
Yeah. Another way I would frame it is the difference between kind of like guarding your heart and hardening it. So for me, like I have these like indicators of when I'm not keeping my heart soft, when it's hardening. It's when anytime I'm on LinkedIn, for example, I'm just like scanning for, I just want to fight, right? You're just like looking at all these posts, like, I just want to fight. I don't even if this is maybe a valid point, you're like, I don't care. This is like garbage, right? It's when I find myself quickly defaulting to everything's terrible and there's no way out of this. Usually for me, I tend to get a lot more introverted. I'm definitely more of an extrovert. So I know when I am just feeling and getting to that place where bitterness and resentment is starting to fester, I get a lot more to myself. I'm not as patient with people that I care about as well. So you also have to just recognize the way it impacts like other people in your life that you care about. So those are kind of like ways that I like recognize it. In terms of like keeping it soft, I tend to be more of like an optimism. And so for me, I'm always nurturing that by just being curious and learning. So what I often do to like help me, especially if I think about like into what's happening today in the world, I need to like pull myself into other industries, other people that I'm not familiar with, and just see how they're thinking about things, life. I'm reading this book I read a lot. I'm reading this book right now on the psychology of video games. And it has been so fascinating and so different from whatever this is outside. And so I kind of like need these like moments to kind of like pull me to things that are creative, that spark joy. I'm creating an astrology for pets app because why not? And because I can. And so that's been fun to just see people happy with their pets, which brings me to my last ramble before I pass it off to you, Alba, is I'm very intentional with who I allow to have access to my energy and my friendship. So there's certain seasons where my circles change. Or I have this friend that I love, but I can't trust them to be a good steward of this dream that I have because they're going to make me question myself. They're going to make me remember all the ways of why it won't work, right? So I have to be really intentional of who I allow to have access to that part of me. But yeah, I'm curious how about like how do you approach that?
Yeah, well, just to like piggyback on like the last point that you brought up, it kind of reminds me of this one exercise that I did in therapy where we almost kind of map our relationships as a series of rings of circles, right? Where like the closer you get to the
Hmm.
center, the fewer people there are, but the tighter knit that group is, right? And then as you kind of go outwards, kind of like the less close that you are, fewer expectations you have for those people, and and so on and so on. And I thought it was a really helpful exercise that she had me do where we identify whether or not someone is in the wrong ring
Mm,
for you based off of their previous behavior with you, right? Because on one hand, that person who's in a closer ring to you, you should trust that person. Theoretically, you would know them better, but they also should have showed up for you in a certain way. And
mm,
that showing up should have been consistent, right? And so trying to kind of like identify, you know, am I positioning this person on the right ring where, the level that I'm confiding in them kind of reflects like their ability to give me like the same type of energy? Are they able to give me like the same things that I'm pouring into them? And so just like knowing where you're pouring your energy into and having the wherewithal to be able to say, hey, you know what, actually, this is like an opportunity for me to disengage from this person so that I can put my energy more into those people that bring me
mm.
life, that give me comfort and are equals like in this relationship.
Yeah, it makes me think about what I call marble jar moments. So I remember hearing this story of this teacher, the kindergarten teacher. Anytime the kids did something well, they would get some marbles added to this marble jar. So lined up quietly for recess, marbles in the marble jar. Cleaned up when she said to clean up, marbles in the marble jar. And so after a while, the jar would get full. And then when the jar became full, they got like a pizza party, right? And I kind of view these moments and trust like marbles in the marble jar. So I'll share with a friend. Here's maybe something that's on my mind. Depending on how they handle it, marbles in the marble jar. Now I know I can come back to you and trust you again with something else. It's kind of like when I'm testing out, before I had the therapist I had now, when I'm testing out a therapist, I have like 7 different versions of how I could tell you about my relationship with my dad. So I'm going to start with like the lowest one of like, yeah, he's just a bum. And I'm going to see how you handle that. And if you get marbles in the marble jar for that. I remember I had a therapist where I was like telling her something that's at nature and she took it way left. And I was like, this is not going to work. And you were not a good steward of that one moment. But yeah, kind of thinking about those marble jar moments to recognize who will be a good steward of you in that moment.
And so this is actually kind of bringing up the question of larger question of boundaries, right? And how do we kind of think about how we like what should be a boundary and how should we enforce it? And I think some people were kind of curious, just some high level thoughts and musings and strategies from you. Like, how do you think about boundaries?
Let's have you go first. I feel like I know I'm a lot more direct with my boundaries, and I feel like you're a lot more poetic in yours.
Or avoidant, as my therapist would tell me. So I recently read this book by Rebecca Ray, and she talked about kind of like three questions to ask yourself if you feel like you're someone who like struggles with boundary setting. And the first question is like, do you think that you're worthy of boundaries? If you trusted that you were worthy, how would your boundaries change? And so really getting into questions around like, do you feel like you deserve to be treated the same way that you want to treat people, right?
Mm,
And the second question that she has you ask yourself is, what are the stories that we tell ourselves? Because in order to rewrite our scripts, we need to make that implicit explicit, right? So, if you're always telling yourself, like, I hate conflict, so I can't possibly set boundaries, how can we rewrite that script? So, if you're someone, for example, who like really grew up in a really volatile home, where you always needed to avoid making other people upset in order to survive. The rewrite would be like, I'm only responsible for my own behavior. I'm not responsible for other people's feelings, right? And so it's like being able to identify those scripts that are preventing you from wanting to engage in boundaries. And I think finally, the third one, which is kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier about these like the relationships that we have with people and the depth of those relationships, like what are we afraid to lose if we enforce our boundaries, but also like what are we afraid to gain if we enforce our boundaries, and how that new version of yourself, once you've imposed those boundaries, like are you ready to kind of step into that new person that you could become if you enforce those boundaries? So I thought that those kind of like three questions were really a great way for me to kind of think through like, okay, what are the lies that I'm telling myself and is the version of myself that I'm scared to become if I enforce a boundary?
hmm I love that. Yeah, I think for me, and some of you might be able to relate to this, if you grew up in a home where you were the other parent to your parent, if your parents were just emotionally unavailable and just not there, it, for me, it was really hard to get clear on articulating what do I need and what do I want. Because growing up, it didn't matter. And then corporate just adds fuel to that, right? Of not being able to prioritize your needs and your wants. And so courtesy of therapy have come a long way in that. And so for me, when I'm thinking about boundaries, I have to write it down. Like, what do I need and want from this boundary? And then right now I'm in a season where the way that I'm deciding what a boundary needs to look like is I'm thinking about what are the things that energize me? What are the things and people that energize me? And what are the things and people that exhaust me? How do I create more distance between me, the people and things that exhaust me? How do I close the gap between me, the people and the things that energize me? So for me, the UX industry exhausts me, specifically UX LinkedIn. My God, I thought design Twitter was bad. And so for me, like, part of just like the negativity and swirl of the UX industry, it's been happening for a little bit, but I'm like, I don't want to participate in this anymore. I'm not speaking at conferences anymore. I'm not posting, LinkedIn posts about my thoughts on LinkedIn on UX. We support UX folks and companies and teams within humanity centered still, but for me personally, I'm like, I have to. It's like killing my spirit. Like I just can't do this. So I created that distance and it's been great. I have a plugin on my LinkedIn where I can mute words and I mute words like Trump, UX, things like that. And it blocks out, all these posts and I'm so much happier. I will mute people and block people if I have to on social media and it's great. And I don't think twice about it, as time goes on. But it's also too, the boundary isn't just about protecting yourself, it's about nourishing yourself too. So like I'm thinking about what's the boundaries you need to put in place so I can be closer to the things and the people that energize me. So one of those boundaries is I'm not going to UX conferences or anything like that for the foreseeable future. I've been going to conferences for like entrepreneurs. And what I've been enjoying about these conferences is that I meet people, they don't know me, and they are so generous in helping me think through problems and connecting me with resources and people. They're creative. They just operate from this place of abundance because they know that there's enough on the table for everyone. Whereas the UX industry is the exact opposite, at least for me. So, a lot of hoarding, a lot of like, I need to be relevant and how do I, elevate myself? And so I'm like, I need to be more around those people over here or conferences or things like that. So again, that's a nourishing boundary. How do I get more involved in these things? Um, but yeah, some thoughts and ramblings for now.
Yeah, and a couple of people actually were dropping in the chat. Can you give the name of that LinkedIn plugin like immediately? And then what are some of the names of those conferences or communities that you've found to be very nourishing?
Yeah, what's the name of this plugin? Popper Blocker, but it's Popper Blocker. I'll put it in the chat. It is probably one of the best things I've ever gotten. And the other one is called No LinkedIn News. And it basically hides that news thing on your homepage that you're forced to deal with. It only works on desktop, but yeah, it's great. I never see what's happening on the LinkedIn news box anymore. And yeah, and the conferences, I don't know. Like the last conference I was at this like pet innovation conference, which is like because of my astrology for pets app, pet industry is just as quirky and weird as you would think it is. So, but yeah, I've been going to kind of like those entrepreneur kind of conferences, and that's been fun. I did go to this one called CapCon. It's like capitalistic con, and the branding's terrible, but the people there were great, and we're actually just like kind and like just good people. The branding's horrible, but CapCon was the other one that I went to.
Super cool. Maybe you can just like offer some like branding services in the meantime. So
CapCon is a thing. It's based in Seattle, and I have not been to that yet.
I'm going to move on here. So, one question that folks have been asking is, what if, especially for those people that usually you try to surround yourself with because they enrich you, they give you spirit, they protect you, like they're just like not okay, right? So you're kind of like your inner circle essentially is like
Yeah.
up with people who are just like really struggling, right? And so it's like really difficult to be present for them because it's like so overwhelming, like what they're going through. So do you have some advice of like how to kind of like navigate those relationships that you do really want to foster and protect and honor, but at the same time, like it's maybe too overwhelming all the time to be around people who are in that kind of state of mind?
Mm, yeah. I'll share two things. With some of my closer friends, we have a code word. Basically, if we text each other, the lifesaver emoji, where you're sinking, you throw that over the ship. If we like text each other that, it's us asking if that person has space to like be with us in that moment. So if the other person does have space, then they'll respond back like, hey, yes, what's going on. If they are also in like a similar spiral, they just text the emoji back. And then we're just in solidarity that we're just both having this moment together. And that's actually been, it sounds silly, but it's actually been helpful, especially when I do get that emoji back. Cause I'm like, okay, I'm not the only one who's just like struggling here. I think in terms of, especially like I know when I'm feeling really overwhelmed and I'm at my emotional capacity, I have different scripts that I have written out for myself to communicate to my friends. So one of those scripts is something along the lines of, let's say I have a friend who reaches out to me and they're just like going through it and I'm barely holding on today. It's just like one of those days. My script goes something along the lines of like, uh essentially just like acknowledging that they're going through something and how hard it is, but then also just being just honest of like I'm also like barely a functioning adult right now. And as much as I want to like give you more space into this, I know I won't be able to show up in the ways that you really need me to as a friend. And so, can I check in with you later tonight, or can I check in with you tomorrow? But I give them like an understanding of time of when I'm gonna swing back instead of just shutting it down. But I do use that phrase of like, I'm barely a functioning adult right now, or the fact that I'm a functioning adult right now is a miracle in and of itself. Like, I'll say things like that, but I always will follow it up with, let me like check in with you though at a later time, and they get it. And so, but yeah, Alba, I don't know how you would handle that.
Yeah, and I think it also just depends on like what do they need from you? And I think something that we can all be better at is like trying to ask ahead of time, like, what do you need from this interaction? Like, what is the purpose of this space, right? Because of the way that I need to show up, if you just want to share and rant, is going to be very different than if you want, you know, me to commiserate with you, right? Like I have to like share something that I'm also feeling that's like similar along the lines that you are, right? And that's going to be very different if you want, you know, help in finding like a solution to whatever issue you're working with, right? And so really trying to, I think, like establish like what is the purpose of this interaction and like what do you need from me in order for this to provide like the comfort that you want from it. I I've been telling people about this book like every time like I talk with them basically, but Adrienne Marie Brown wrote a book called Holding Change. And I absolutely love it. It's written through the perspective of a activist and how do you essentially like hold people in these like really difficult conversations that are necessary for social change. And one of the chapters that she has, it was like a light bulb going off for me, where she talks about that a lot of the conflict and the frustration and the stress that we feel like when we're interacting with folks in these like very difficult times that we live in comes from the fact that people have a different understanding of what is the purpose of the space that we're entering together, right? You know, for example, like let's say you are the head of an ERG within your company, and you know, you might have a gathering of your ERG members, and like sometimes things go off the rails, right? Because some people they just want to vent. Some people they actually are trying to like organize something and then like other people just want to kind of share their personal stories and traumas, right? And then that can create a lot of conflict and issues because we all have a very different understanding of like what we're doing here together. And so in her book Holding Change, she really talks about like what are some of those questions that you can ask to understand what are people coming in with and what do they want to come out with so that you can make those engagements like a lot more productive and just like safer because everyone consents to what is going to be discussed like within that moment together. And so I find like that's like really helpful is just to like get very clear about that. And sometimes people don't know how to answer that. And that's then the question that should be discussed versus just jumping into, you know, whatever people want to share to begin with.
And I think it's also about being able to recognize when you're trauma bonding. When I'm thinking about like trauma bonding, you're like bonding over the thing that's causing you pain and harm instead of bonding with each other. And like, I think a lot of times we can normalize that as like a relationship or like a connection or a friendship. But like trauma bonding isn't that. It's like the farthest thing from. And it's actually probably why a lot of people, when they leave their workplaces and they realize that they're not friends with that one colleague anymore, it's because, well, your friendship was built on just talking about how much you hate your boss, right? And so I think that's like an important note. And again, I will say I'm a lot more, I just, and part of it's just life, but I'm very aggressive with like protecting my peace these days. So for me, I've had to learn to be okay with not being able to save everyone or making sure everyone is getting the comfort that they need. There's just sometimes where I just can't do it. I can still respond from like a place of love and care and concern, but I had to learn how to not allow that fear of disappointing that person to put me in this perpetual cycle of self-neglect. And so that's more of an art than a science for sure. And that just takes a lot of like repetition and like reps to really do that. Exactly. Can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Listen, but I've had to learn to be okay with not everything being tied up in a pretty bow when I'm like with certain people. And yeah, it is what it is.
Ah, okay, great. So, one question that a few folks have asked is what rituals or advice do you have for people who are going through a major life transition, for example, like a career transition or evolution, to help them kind of get through the grief of that change?
Hmm. Can you reframe it or re-say that?
Yeah, so I think this person is like going through a major life change. So let's say like a career transition. They're leaving the industry, for example, and they're
Mm.
exploring new options. Like what, but they are saying that they're experiencing a lot of grief around that change in their life. How, like what type of advice would you give that person as they're making this transition?
Yeah, I would say like, I mean, my mind and what I've done before when I've been in a similar place is I default to doing that burning bowl ritual. It just helps me to identify what are some of the things that are adding to the grief potentially. I also try and get clear on what is it that I'm grieving and what is it that I'm like angry over, especially when it came to like workplace things. When I left corporate America in 2021, March 1st, at first there's just like a lot of excitement. You're like curious, you're hopeful about what's possible, and then you're hit with this wave of grief and anger about 30 days after. And I had to also just be okay with being vulnerable with people that I trusted and knew cared about me and like were in my corner, and just being honest with like, hey, I'm like struggling, or hey, I'm not okay, or hey, here's something that I'm working through right now. So if you could like check in on me, that'd be great. And part of that is just recognizing that a lot of times when we have questions or moments like this, we think it's a solo journey, when in reality, it should be a shared one. We need to be thinking about who we trust, who within like our support care system we can invite to like buoy us in those moments. You don't have to, I think a lot of times when I hear questions like this, it's about how do I find endurance or grit or the strength to like pull myself through this transition or this grief or this anger. And yes, there's a part of that, but it's also an invitation to invite others into it as well.
Yeah, and I think if we want to go a little bit more abstract, right? Like I think what's really interesting about like grief rituals is that they often kind of follow the same script or the same pattern, right? Like we want to acknowledge what was lost, what was
Mm-hmm.
left. We want to recognize and honor what was lost. We want to see if we can restore what remains and celebrates what continues. And then we want to ask ourselves, like, what futures or possibilities now exist that didn't before, right? And so, like, actually being able to kind of reflect on those questions or come up with rituals, design rituals yourself that can answer those questions is one way that you can kind of get in the rhythm of that.
Mm-hmm. And I think for me, one signal that has helped me to understand if I've been able to move through, especially like something that's caused grief, that might be, there might be some anger in there as well, is when I find that I'm no longer trying to make sense of it. Like I'm okay not having it make complete sense anymore. And again, it ebbs and flows, but like that's usually kind of like a gauge for me is like, and believe me, there's two people specifically where it it'll be a long time before that kind of like goes away. But I know as time goes on, it becomes less and less. So I gauge myself with that.
Mm. How do you balance kind of like choosing discomfort and risk and wanting to still, I guess, like have energy for it, right? Because I feel like certain risks probably take
Mm.
more from you, but we know that we need to do them. And so how do you kind of think through the I guess like the emotional heaviness of braveness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good question. Can you answer so I can have a moment to like think about it?
I mean, this is something that I would like struggle with myself. So I'm actually really curious about your the way that you would answer it. But
Yeah. I
go ahead.
yeah, I think I'm in like a similar-ish place right now. There's a lot going on in life, always with me. And I've had to kind of do what my therapist would say is like an audit. There's two audits. There's one about like energy. So what are the things, people, whatever in my life, and how much energy, like emotional energy, are they taking? So even with humanity centered, there are seasons where because life is life in for one or both of us, what have you, where we will not work with certain clients because they would be the emotional equivalent of working with like four clients. Why? Why put ourselves through that? So we've had to like, and that's meant we've had to leave money on the table. But, part of it then allowed us to have more space and energy to like pour back into ourselves. So I do an energy audit. I will limit then like certain people that I might need to spend more time with, less time with, what have you. I've had to step away from commitments that I've made just because I'm like, when I do this audit of my capacity, realistically, I unfortunately have to walk away from this one commitment and the world will move on afterwards. And then the other one is my therapist. This is a newer one. She's having me do a joy audit. She's like, what are the things you're doing that are also pouring back into that tank that's bringing you a lot of joy? What are my joy rituals? And usually when I do that audit and I'm really struggling to think about what's happening, that's how I know that I need to change either certain disciplines are going on, people I'm hanging out with, habits. Do I need to be rewatching Scandal again? No, I don't. Like turn off the TV, things like that. But yeah. Again, more of an art than a science. But yeah, Alba, I'm curious what you're thinking.
No, I mean, I love this idea of an audit, right? And that it can apply to so many like different realms of our life. This is actually kind of like tagging into another like series of questions that people have been submitting around just like how do you kind of understand or get in touch with your personal values, right? Because I think like a lot of times we might be surrounded by people or have experienced events that just like challenge our own perception of like what we value and what we like hold true. And so there have been several questions around just like how do you kind of find that sense of purpose again, understand your values, remember your values, like when it feels like you're kind of being crushed on all sides around that.
Yeah, my answer will be colored by just a personal life experience I had. I had like a couple near-death experiences in my like late 20s, actually early 20s. Forgetting how old I was for a second. And because of that, I just think about death often. Not in like a suicidal way, but I'm very aware of how much time I have. And it's very limited on this side of forever. So for me, when I'm like in this moment of needing to like recalibrate or retether myself to clarity around my values, I often do it through the lens of like, in the grand scheme of things, we're all going to be dead in 60, 70 years, however old you are. And is it more important for me to explore what does it look like to honor my values in this way or to help my billionaire boss go to space again? And I just kind of like start there and I work my way through it. But again, that doesn't make it easy. And I think that's what's really important about this question is there's no easy way to do this. Um, and it often means I need to have some hard conversations about what are the ways that I've been portraying myself by not honoring this particular value. What are the ways that I'm being really short-sighted and I've forgotten kind of like the larger vision that I have for my life? What are some harder decisions I need to make that honestly probably require me to confess some ways that I've been just not being my best self, whether that's to my therapist, my best friend, my confidant, whoever it is. But I do it with the understanding that yes, life is short, but life is so, so good. There's a lot of terrible things, but man, there's a lot of really freaking good things in life. And that's what really gets me excited and gets me then retethered back to like my values of like, all right, then I have however many years left. Like, what am I going to do with that? How am I going to enjoy life and flourish through life and not just endure it? So, yeah, that's what comes to mind for me.
I think we have like maybe time for one last question. And someone had dropped this in the chat around how do you kind of think about the relationship between protest and hope? Like, what are the different ways like we can, I guess, protest via hope? Uh, and so on
I
and so on. Yeah.
feel like you'll answer this question better than me.
You know, I think that there's like multiple ways that we can protest. And I think it starts small. It's not necessarily being on the streets or waving around signs or organizing things. It really starts with the individual and then it goes out. And I was thinking of, there was like a season of my life where my depression was really, really bad. And because of that, I was making certain life decisions that weren't conducive to longevity and sustainability. And I think for me, there was this like really interesting moment where I realized that like a lot of this like unhealthy behavior is because I didn't really have a sense of that there could be a future, right?
Mm,
And there was a moment though when I recognized that and I just made the choice to do a small version of that behavior. So, for example, like, if you don't feel like you're going to be around for a long time, sometimes you don't invest in your own financial health, right? Because it's like, what's the point if you're not going to be around for that, right? Or like you don't invest in your physical health, right? Because you don't think that you're going to be around for a long time. And so there was a moment where I recognize that like, yeah, like we can keep on enduring, we can keep on doing. And I like opened up like a special savings account or a special like investment account. And that was like a moment of protest, right? Because there was like a hope that there would be some type of future to look forward to. And that small act really helped me kind of make other decisions in my life where it's like, yeah, like they reaffirmed that I was going to be around and that I should invest in myself because I was going to be around and there was a future to look forward to. And there's all these things that I can do because of that. So when I think about protest and I think about hope, like it's always this idea that there's going to be a tomorrow. What No matter how bad today is, there is a tomorrow that your form of protest is that you can do something with the idea that there is going to be a tomorrow, that what you do today is going to have consequence, like, and implications and benefit in the future. So I don't know if that is answering
yeah.
this person's like question around protest and hope, but I think it goes back to Vivianne's point around hope being the rejection of despair, that there's no other alternative out there. And so, what can you do every day to protest that there isn't a tomorrow there for you that could possibly be better? That is what the
Hmm.
protest is.
I love that because it gives creative lens and license to like what that looks like for you. It doesn't have to be the same checklist that, this blog gave out or what have you. And I mean, it makes me even think of like I remember again, this is a couple of weeks or so ago, just feeling so heavy by everything that's happening in the world. And I reached out to my friend and I was like, I want to take like the nephews, let's go to medieval times. First of all, I'm surprised they're still even in business after all these years. But I was like, I'm gonna book us a bunch of tickets to go to medieval times and we're going to have fun. I'm gonna buy the boys a bunch of swords and you can deal with that at your house since they're not mine. And let's just like have fun and like joy. That's like an act of protest, right? Versus just like there's nothing good and fun to like do with people I love and care about. So I appreciate that box. That's good. Well, y'all, we're at time. I want to thank y'all for, again, extending that energy, the time to join us. We will give you the activities, the recording. We'll pull a lot of the resources too that y'all dropped in the chat, and we'll update the resource guide with that. If you can give us until like Monday to get that to you so we can clean it up on your end and make it all nice for you, that'd be great. Otherwise, I hope you have a great weekend. I hope you drink water. If you're working, I hope you bury your work laptop in the deepest, darkest hole you can find. And you have a good one. We'll chat soon, y'all.
Okay, bye, everyone.
Thanks for hanging out with us and diving into some of these real and unfiltered conversations. We know your time is valuable, and so we don't take it for granted. If today's episode made you think, if it challenged you, or gave you something new to consider, we'd love for you to hit that follow button on whatever streaming service you're using. That way, you'll never miss an episode when we drop them. And if you want to go even deeper, sign up for our newsletter at ChooseCourageInc.com, and you'll get updates on new episodes, access to exclusive freebies, and first dibs on coaching opportunities and other resources to help you make bold moves in your life and business. So we appreciate you, we see you, and we're rooting for you. Until next time, keep choosing courage over comfort, and a friendly reminder to drink some water.